Hello and welcome to PhDtalk. My name is Miriam and I'm the host in this podcast where I interview PhD students to let them talk about their topics and struggles and joys, and where me and others share tips with you to make your life as a PhD student more effective, less stressful, and most importantly, more fun. For today's episode, I interviewed Clara Kopp. Clara and I are colleagues at the University of Copenhagen at the Department of Plant and Environmental Sciences. Clara is a Marie Curie PhD fellow, and she researches nutrient availability in bio-based fertilizers. Her focus is on phosphorus, and she studies how biochar and ashes can be an alternative to mineral supplies of phosphorus or mineral fertilizer supplies of phosphorus. Today's introduction is in German, which for a change means that I fully understand what my guest is saying. And I hope you learned something new today. And then let's talk science.
Hallo, ich bin Clara und ich promoviere an der Universität Kopenhagen in Dänemark. Und der Name meines PhD-Projekts ist Erhöhung der pflanzlichen Phosphorverfügbarkeit von Biokohle und Asche aus Abfallstoffen. Biokohle ist ein Material, das ähnlich wie Holzkohle unter Sauerstoffabschluss hergestellt wird und dadurch viele stabile Kohlenstoffverbindungen enthält und außerdem auch Phosphor. Und Phosphor ist ein wichtiger Pflanzennährstoff. Und theoretisch könnte also diese Biokohle aufs Feld ausgebracht werden und man könnte mineralischen Phosphordünger einsparen und gleichzeitig den Kohlenstoffgehalt des Bodens erhöhen, was dann langfristig CO2 im Boden binden würde. Allerdings ist der Phosphor in Biokohle in einer Form, die nicht für Pflanzen verfügbar ist und deswegen funktioniert das nicht so gut als Dünger. Und in meinem Promotionsprojekt entwickle ich Methoden, um die Phosphorverfügbarkeit zu erhöhen. Und meistens mache ich das, indem ich den pH-Wert erhöhe oder verändere, zum Beispiel durch die Vorbehandlung mit Säuren oder anderen Chemikalien, oder ich kombiniere die Biokohle mit anderen Düngemitteln oder auch biologisch durch Fermentation der Biokohle zusammen mit anderen Abfallstoffen, um so dann eben den pH-Wert zu ändern und die Phosphorverfügbarkeit zu erhöhen.
Hi Clara.
Hi.
Welcome to my little office. Clara and I are colleagues and she works just across the hall. And today she is my guest in my little podcast. And maybe you would like to start with telling us a bit about what you did before you became my office mate.
Yeah, sure. So first of all, thanks for the invitation.
Sure.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to talk a bit about my project and everything. So, to start with, I studied at the University of Hohenheim in southern Germany, close to Stuttgart. And my bachelor degree was agricultural sciences, and then my master degree was called crop sciences. So that was quite some sciencey master program, related to crops especially. And I then quite fast focused on, so it already started during my bachelor's, and then during my master, I already started working with bio-based fertilizers and nutrient recycling, and so a bit also what I'm doing right now.
Okay, so you knew quite early that you wanted to do something related to agriculture.
Yes. You mean then the study program, or?
Yeah, the study program.
Nah, that actually was, I decided on that just before, or like after my Abitur, my graduation actually. It was more because I didn't really have another idea, so it was more like, some backup plan. And I mean, what I liked about the bachelor program, it was really nice because you cover a lot of different areas. You talk about economics, you talk about, of course, natural sciences, then there's also social sciences, and it's quite diverse, and I like that. And
so agriculture from many perspectives.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that was quite nice. But then, somehow I was interested in more like the natural science part of it.
Okay.
So.
And then you ended up doing a PhD. How did that come?
I don't even really know. So even when I started the bachelor, I think I already thought about or I knew that there's this option to do a PhD, and it always seemed nice to me, but it was never like a serious plan I had or like a goal or something. And then also during my master thesis, I really enjoyed research and like having this little project. And
what was that about?
That was on compost fertilization, and it was quite nice. It was a long-term experiment. So basically that means you have a field and you apply the same kind of fertilizer for a very long time. And in my case, that was 18 years. And it was also quite nice because not so many people have actually done research on this experiment before. Yeah, and so that was quite exciting. And then, my topic was how this long-term fertilization with compost, how that changes the soil and the soil organic matter and the availability of nutrients. And yeah.
How does it change it?
Compost contains a lot of carbon, obviously, and so the carbon content increased. But when it comes to nutrients, it's actually not that effective, and you really need to apply a lot.
Okay.
And for phosphorus, it increased a little, and also for nitrogen. You can maybe substitute some mineral fertilizer with it, but it's not like a real fertilizer treatment. Or
I see. So then you ended up here.
Yeah, exactly. And then I enjoyed the master project and everything. Yeah, and then I just saw my position, and actually my position is part of a big Marie Curie funded project. It's like an international training network, and there was actually 15 PhD positions all over Europe. The overall topic is bio-based fertilizers. And so I thought that was quite interesting. Some of the positions were really interesting, and I could imagine working in that area. But then I also really liked Copenhagen. And then for some reason, then I applied here and in Copenhagen and in Italy, actually. And then I ended up here.
And you ended up in Copenhagen?
Yes.
Okay. When did you start then? Like, how long has it been
so
since you started?
Next week, my second year ends.
Oh, okay.
So I only have one more year left, which is crazy. Like time passes really fast.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess almost every PhD student has that feeling.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
Okay. So now you are part of the group that I'm also part of. That's the soil fertility group at the University of Copenhagen. And what's your topic specifically?
So the name of my topic is enhancing the phosphorus availability from biochars and ashes.
What is the biochar?
And biochar, I guess, is the more interesting part, more interesting than the ashes. Biochar it's similar to the coal production process. Basically, you have a biomass, and then you heat it up, but without any oxygen, and then this black carbonous material forms, which is called biochar, and it contains a lot of stable carbon. The good thing about biochar is then it basically captures the carbon, and if you apply it to the soil, then it will increase the carbon content of the soil, which can, combat climate change, or a carbon sink, basically. And then I also work with the ashes, which is basically just burning waste materials, different biomasses. And the biomasses or waste products that I'm working with are all rich in phosphorus, because I'm focused on phosphorus. And so it's, for example, sewage sludge and slaughterhouse wastes, and also slurry, or in my case, it's digested slurry. So pig slurry that gets digested, and then afterwards, of course, the digestate is also quite liquidy, and then you separate the solids and the liquid fraction, and then the solid fraction gets pyrolyzed, and then you have the digestate biochar.
So you look at those different, you call them bio-based fertilizers, and then you look at how they, what?
Then my focus is then what happens if you apply those biochars and ashes to the soil. How do they release the nutrients? How available are the nutrients for the plants? And how can we actually use it as a fertilizer? And that's the question.
Okay, so you want to see whether the plant is actually able to get the phosphorus that is inside of the biochar into its plant biomass.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay, and how can you know?
Yeah, there's many different ways to test that. And first of all, you can, of course, just look at the material itself, and you can do different analysis on the material, like how, for example, different wet chemical extractions, which is basically just putting the material into a little tube and then shake it a little bit with in some cases just water, but you can also use different chemicals. They're actually supposed to mimic the soil solution a little bit, and then
and then you see whether anything dilutes from the biochar.
If the biochar releases some nutrients, and then I can analyze the liquid and see what nutrients are in there. So that is like just looking at the material itself. But then what I also did a lot, which is actually quite a simple setup, I think. You just take some soil, you take your materials, you mix the materials with your soil, and then you let some plants grow in that soil. And then you would also always have a comparison, a soil without any biochar addition. And then you see if you actually get an improvement with the biochar.
Okay.
And then you can measure the uptake and how much phosphorus the plant actually gets from the soil. That also gives some indications on the availability.
Okay. And what have you found so far? Can I ask?
Yeah, sure. So far, so I'm working on enhancing the nutrient availability, because actually the materials itself often have a very low phosphorus availability.
Because it's stuck to the carbon.
The carbon, it's like everything is quite stable, and so are the nutrients that are in this matrix, and then that's why not a lot of them get easily released, and the plant can take them up. Initially, the fertilizer value is quite low, but that also depends a little bit on what kind of soil you use. And I mean, the world is big. There's a lot of different soils, and one of the biggest factors in my case is soil pH, which makes a big difference. So if you apply the materials to soil with a lower pH, you could actually get a better release, but still not a lot of phosphorus. And what I tested now is acidifying the materials. And that just works like I take the materials and I apply a little bit of acid. In my case, it's sulfuric acid to the materials, mix it a little bit, and then I dry it. And then I apply this acidified material to the soil.
Okay, so if the soil doesn't have the low pH, then you have to create a low pH.
Yeah, exactly. You could think about that, like,
Okay.
And that works actually quite well. That was my first big experiment I did, where I could see that we could get a huge effect from this acidification. And it's also interesting, for example, for sludge-based materials, for sewage sludge biochar, it also works the other way. And if you increase the pH a lot, applying sodium hydroxide in my case, you could also get a release from phosphorus from
so you need one or the other extreme.
Yeah, at least in case of the sewage sludge biochar, because that has like different phosphorus compounds in it. Also because the way wastewater is treated in our wastewater treatment plants. And so I think that's quite nice that you can see an effect with both an increase and a decrease in pH.
Then if you apply it to the soil, does the acid have any effect on the plant, or does the plant doesn't care?
Yeah, that's something. So in the beginning, I was a bit worried about it, that, I mean, soil has a high buffer capacity. So if you just apply a little bit of material, and it's really half a teaspoonful that you apply maybe to like 3 kilograms of soil, and then you mix it very well. So
it's so little.
It's so little, and then the soil is quite a good buffer, depending on the soil, obviously. But so the pH change is not that big, and the plant is not affected. But at some point, I also tested together with a colleague. He's testing or working on placing fertilizers in the soil to make them better available for the plants. And I tested that with this acidified biochar, and it actually didn't work at all, because then you have all of this material that with a lot of acid and a low pH concentrated in one spot, and that's not something that the plant likes, and it would never grow its roots in that area because of the pH. And and that is actually the idea of the placement. So
so either placement or acidification, kind of.
But so, for example, with the biochars, also the placement doesn't make sense, because it doesn't release any phosphorus when it's not acidified, and that's why also the placement alone is not helping.
Okay,
yeah,
it's not enough. Yeah, okay, I see. Why would you have this detour of producing the biochar first? Like, why wouldn't you apply the waste on the fields directly? Why is that?
Yeah, so there's different reasons for that. So first of all, what I already explained a little bit is the carbon that is fixed into the biochar that is very stable. And so we wouldn't get that if we just apply the sewage sludge, for example, directly. Okay. Then the carbon can be like easily released and it would just go into the air again. So then you wouldn't have any carbon sequestration. And then there's different reasons. So for example, that is, I guess, most relevant for slaughterhouse wastes and also a bit for sewage sludge. The pyrolysis process, you actually heat up the product quite a lot. So depends obviously, but something between 300 or 800 degrees usually.
Okay.
Or even more. And then you can actually get rid of a lot of pathogens.
Okay, so it's also a hygiene topic. Okay.
And you can also decrease the volume of your waste.
Yeah, for transportation.
Yeah, which helps and makes it easier to transport it from like nutrient-rich areas to other areas. And in some cases, it can also remove heavy metal, the pyrolysis process, especially cadmium, which is a problem. So you don't want to have the heavy metals in the fertilizer. And that is a way to get rid of that.
Okay. Another question. When you acidify the biochar to make the nutrients available, and you also said that you want to keep the carbon in the soil, like if I make the nutrients available, do I also would the carbon escape?
Yeah, that's actually a good question, and I cannot really answer that yet. But we actually, I mean, of course, we know that we need to look into that as well. And of course, it makes sense that if you release some nutrients, you will probably also release some carbon, or you could decrease the carbon sequestration potential. But I think it's only like a small amount of acid and not such a high concentration. And I don't think it will have a huge effect, but probably it will decrease the carbon stability a little bit. But yeah, we are still planning to have an experiment on that. And I guess in that case, you could say you would just need to find a balance between being able to use it as a fertilizer and let it have a carbon sequestration potential, or I guess you just need to find the right balance.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, makes sense. And then how does your research continue from then? You said that was your first experiment?
So the first experiment was the experiment where I tried out this acidification pre-treatment.
In the water or in the acid. And then you placed it in the soil together with the plants. Yeah. And you harvested the plants.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
So that was the first experiment. And then I did a similar experiment on what I also just told you, the alkalinization of the sludge biochar. So that was a similar experiment. What I'm working on now is, until a few months ago, I just used sulfuric acid for this acidification. But now we're also trying to use some kind of fermentation process to actually get a natural acidification, to not use an inorganic acid, because that would obviously be nicer. Let's see how that works.
Okay. What excites you about this? Like, what do you think could your research contribute to?
So generally, I really like the work as a researcher, and it's very...
Yeah. What do you like about it?
I think it's quite exciting, and I feel like every week is different. I have to say the last couple of weeks I've been mainly writing, which then of course is pretty similar. But if you have experiments, you have so many different tasks, and you can plan every week is something new. And so I think that's pretty nice. And then of course, maybe you also travel a bit, and you're in touch with other researchers, with other nationalities. And that is something I really enjoy. And then I also think, of course, my research will only have a small impact, and it will only be a small step. And the world will only know a little bit more about biochar after my project is done. But anyways, I feel like it could contribute to something bigger, and maybe at some point in a few years, farmers will actually apply biochar. And I guess in Denmark, it's actually quite high chances that that's going to happen. So
okay, why particularly in Denmark?
Because Denmark, they are quite ambitious with their climate goals.
Okay.
And as far as I understood, biochar is actually a big part of their strategy to reduce emissions from agriculture. And that's why I think it's quite likely that biochar will be applied to fields in the future in Denmark. And I think maybe then in a few years that happens. And then it's good if they know more about the nutrient release. And
yeah, of course, the farmer wants to know what they put on their fields.
Yeah, and what we are also hoping for a little bit, I mean, until now, there's not so much in for the farmer to apply biochar.
Okay.
Of course, if they could sell carbon credits or something like that from the carbon that they have then on their fields. But yeah, other than that, they don't get a lot of benefits. Of course, also the biochar improves the soil quality and everything. But if they would have the biochar and they could apply it and they would get an immediate fertilizer response and the plant would grow better, then it would be a big incentive for them to apply biochar.
Yeah,
at least I hope so.
Yeah, especially now the fertilizer prices are getting up so much, right?
Yeah, that could also play a role. And nobody really knows how that's going to develop the next years.
Yeah, that's right. And you just mentioned that it increases the soil quality just as it is. And why is that? Why does it improve the soil quality?
That, of course, also depends on the soil. Generally, I think it was shown that in like tropical soils, the effect of biochar is much larger because usually soil quality is not as high. Like it's very acidic soils. The soils are quite weathered and there's like a lot of nutrients already leached from the soil.
Okay.
The soil is not able to hold a lot of nutrients. And so in that case, biochar can have a big effect because it has a very large surface area, and so it can also bind a lot of nutrients and like hold them in the soil.
Okay.
And then the pH is also, depending on the biochar, is also high. And so usually farmers apply a lot of lime to their fields to increase the pH. And so biochar has a similar effect. It can also increase the water holding capacity of the soil, which of course is also good when you think about climate change and the droughts we have in Europe. And so that's why biochar has a lot of positive effects, or can have a lot of positive effects, apart from nutrients.
Okay, so what are we waiting for?
I guess it's not so easy also to convince farmers, and laws need to be changed. And
okay, I see. Yeah, exciting.
Yeah, it is.
And you also said at the beginning that you are part of a greater EU project. Maybe you would like to tell us a bit about that?
Yes. Yeah, so I'm part of, they call it International Training Network. And as I said in the beginning, it's 15 PhD positions in, I think, 6-7 European universities. And all the PhDs are working on somehow related to bio-based fertilizers. And I think it's really nice because we meet up a lot, and twice a year we have big meetings where everybody meets and then we discuss about our findings and we collaborate a lot with each other. We also have courses together, so courses on bio-based fertilizers, but also courses on academic writing and outreach and communication and project management and all the other things more related to having a scientific research project. Yeah, and I think has been really nice, and there's a lot of exchange of experiences, of ideas, materials. Yeah, motivates you more to know that you're part of something bigger.
Okay, yeah, makes sense. Part of the research community.
Yes.
Nice. So do you think you want to stay in academia? Is that too early to ask?
I think I could really imagine that, and because I enjoy it a lot. But then, I mean, working conditions in academia, or actually, I mean, here it's pretty good. I really enjoy working here, but then on the long term, there's not a lot of stability and security. And that's something that keeps me away a little bit, but generally I would be quite motivated.
Yeah.
So let's see what the future brings.
Yeah. Good. Nice. In this EU project, did you also go on an exchange? Did you also?
Oh yeah, I didn't mention that. So I went on an exchange to Portugal for 3-4 months. And so I had a little experiment in Portugal. I went there. There was also another PhD that is part of the project and another professor that supervised me for that part of my work. And yeah.
Okay.
And it's also nice because we're receiving a lot of people. So a lot of people from the project are coming to Copenhagen. And
maybe if you could think of what you would tell your younger self prior to your PhD, is there anything you would tell them? Or you were like, everything went just fine?
Yeah, I don't really have a good advice, I guess. Maybe sometimes to not worry about stuff too much. I mean, anyways, we cannot control everything. So maybe sometimes it's better to just, relax a little bit or just not worry too much. And enjoy more, maybe.
Okay.
But nothing really in particular, I think.
Okay.
Nothing else.
Yeah, good. And maybe one more thing, if we imagine the hobby gardener, would they have any, could they use biochar? Would it be useful for them in my private garden?
I think so, but I'm not sure. I mean, it's always hard to tell if they would get an effect, and I don't imagine that you would apply a little bit of biochar and then you get the biggest tomatoes. And I think it's more, also for a little garden. I mean, the whole growing system is different. It's not as intense as our agricultural systems. But I guess applying a little bit will definitely not do any harm. And if you know that you have an acidic soil, for example, or something, it could help.
Okay. Is there anything else you would like to tell us?
I don't think so. I feel like I explained a lot about the project, and
Okay, perfect. And thanks a lot for the interview.
Thanks for having me.
Sure. Bye-bye.
Bye.
I hope you enjoyed today's interview. And if you found Clara's research fascinating, interesting, and want to know more, then feel free to leave a comment or a question and we will get back to you. Thanks for listening, and I'm looking forward to sharing the next episode with you. And until then, I wish you all the best and bye for now.